Shalom, shalom. Davon Mays here with Clouds of Torah, and we are going to continue the Israel, Hamas, and the Holy Land Part 3 concerning the land and the war and how Israel obtained the land. The first two videos I showed where Israel was in the wrong concerning, according to the Torah, what they're supposed to be doing to be in the land, what all the Gentiles or non-Jews are supposed to be doing to be in the land. So this is not a one-sided argument. This is not a biased argument. Israel is supposed to keep the Torah. This will guarantee their safety and the blessings that they have in the land, as well as the Gentiles. And so I've already shown what Israel has done to bring about the problems that they have living in the land. Now, and I really didn't want to bring any like political documents into this, but what I've been hearing is a narrative like Israel just came in guns blazing and just kind of like kicked everybody out the land and took it and killed everybody. That's how they got the land back. And this is not true. So let's get into it. Jeremiah 32, 44, 41 through 44, speaking about Israel buying back the land. Now, this was in the time of the first temple period. They were kicked out of Israel, sent to Babylon, but they came back. But when they came back, they bought the land. So let's see how significant this chapter is. Jeremiah 32, 41 through 44. Yes, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart, with all my soul. For thus says the Lord, just I have brought all this great calamity on this people, so I will bring on them all the good that I have promised them. So we see the Most High says he does punish Israel, and he brings the calamity on them. But it says in verse 43, and fields will be bought in this land of which you say it is desolate. Pay attention. This is desolate land without man or beast. It has been given into the hand of the Chaldeans. Now, at this time, it was given to a foreign power. Men will buy fields for money, sign deeds, and seal them and take witnesses. So it's going to be documented that they are buying the land with witnesses and deeds. In the land of Benjamin, in the places around Jerusalem, in the cities of Judah, in the cities of the mountains, in the cities of the lowland, and in the cities of the south, for I will cause their captive to return, says the Lord. So we can see an example of deeds and purchasing and witnesses concerning the buying of the land of Israel after they've come back out of captivity or for some type of exile, right? So if you go to Wikipedia, look up the Sursock Purchase. So this is what it says. The Sursock Purchase of the Jezreel Valley and Haifa Bay, as well as other parts of Mandatory Palestine, was the largest Jewish land purchase in Palestine during the period of early Jewish immigration. So this was not a war. This was a purchase. The Jezreel Valley was considered the most fertile region of Palestine. The Sursock Purchase represented 58% of Jewish land purchases from absentee foreign landlords, people who wasn't even there, as identified in a partial list in a 25th of February 1946 memorandum submitted by the Arab Higher Committee to the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry. The buyers demanded the existing population to be relocated, and as a result, the Palestinian Arab tenant farmers were evicted. I'm going to read that again. 58% of Jewish land purchases from absentee foreign landlords. So whoever owned the land didn't even live there. Then it says, the buyers demanded the existing population to be relocated. So if you bought a house from somebody and somebody else was in that house, can you tell the people who were, let's say they were renting the house, but you bought it? Do you have the right to tell them to leave because now that's your house? Yes, you do. The buyers demanded the existing population be relocated, and as a result, the Palestinian Arab tenant farmers. That means they did not own the land. They were tenant farmers. They were just working the land. But if it's my land now, I don't want you here tenant farming my land. It says they were evicted. I don't think evicted is the right word when they don't own the land. And approximately 20 to 25 villages were depopulated. Why? Because they didn't own the land. It was purchased from absentee foreign landlords. Some of the evicted population received compensation, though the buyers were not required under the new British mandate law to pay. So even though they were not required, they still gave some of these people money. And again, this term evicted, evicted is like when you was paying the rent and stopped paying the rent. These people were just the farmers on the land. They didn't own the land because it was owned by absentee foreign landlords, according to the Sursock Purchase. So a tenant farmer is a person, farmer or farm worker, who resides on land owned by a landlord. So that's not their land. So if you ask them to leave, they're supposed to leave. And they were even compensated, even though it was not required under the new British mandate law to pay. So if it's a British mandate law, who was really in control or who had the real power over the land was the British, not the Palestinians. And who were these absentee foreign landlords the land was bought from? It doesn't say it was the Palestinians. Or did I miss something? This is all on Wikipedia. I gave the links. Right or wrong, look it up. Just reading what some history says. And I'm not giving a verdict. Maybe whoever wrote this article is wrong, but you can more than welcome to challenge it. I don't have a problem with that, because I'm also going to go to what the UN says about it. And the UN says the exact same things. From the 1880s to the 1930s, most Jewish land purchases were made in the coastal plain, the Jezreel Valley, the Jordan Valley, to a lesser extent, the Galilee. This was due to a preference for land that was cheap and without tenants. Nobody was there. There were two main reasons why these areas were sparsely populated. That means not a lot going on there. The first reason being when the Ottoman power in the rural areas began to diminish in the 17th century, many people moved to more centralized areas to secure protection against the Bedouin tribes. The second reason for the sparsely populated areas of the coastal plains was the soil type. The soil covered in a layer of sand made it impossible to grow the staple crop of Palestine, corn. So you couldn't even farm it. So nobody was living there. And it was cheap without tenants. It was a purchase. Nobody was forced out of this land. It wasn't farmable. As a result, this area remained uncultivated and underpopulated. The sparse Arab population in the areas where the Jews usually bought their land enabled the Jews to carry out their purchases without engendering a massive displacement and eviction of Arab tenants, not owners, tenants. Remember? Tenants. Remember that. Remember, a tenant farmer does not own the land. You're just working it. In the 1930s, most of the land was bought from landowners. Of the land that the Jews bought, 52.6% were brought from non-Palestinian landowners. 52% of that land. 24.6% from Palestinian landowners, 13.4% from government, churches, and foreign companies, and only 9.4% from fellahin farmers. Remember this word, fellahin farmers. But foreign companies, government, and churches What government was that? Was that a Palestinian government? Was that an Ottoman Empire government? Was that a Turkish government? Like who was the government that the Jews were buying the land from? Because it don't say Palestinians, and it does say 52% came from non-Palestinian owners, and it does tell you 24.6% from Palestinian landowners. So the Palestinians were selling the land to the Jews. It doesn't say that they stole it with force. It doesn't say that. So now let's go to the UN and see if they can confirm what I just read. From the time of the Romans to the 19th century, the land tenure and the land cultivation systems in Palestine had two main features. First, there were no laws or regulations on the management and cultivation of land in Palestine that were not completely out of date. And secondly, the big landowners owned nearly all the land. Who were the big landowners? If they bought 52% from non-Palestinian landowners, that don't sound like they came over there with guns blazing. That sounds like they came over there with them dollars. Most of the big landowners belonged to the privileged upper class, the nobles who generally lived away from their land. So this is the UN telling you exactly what Wikipedia is saying. People who wasn't even there. People who wasn't even there owned it. That is to say, they were absentee landlords. Ain't that what Wikipedia said? Without tenants, absentee foreign landlords, Wikipedia, United Nations, absentee landlords whose agricultural land was cultivated by the fellaheen for a pittance. Remember, remember this, fellaheen farmers. So other people was taking care of the land for these foreign landlords or absentee landlords. Sorry. This system of tenant farming, known as fief, under the Turkish occupation, the Turkish occupation became less frequent towards 1858 when the authorities of the Ottoman Empire decided to establish a land registry, the Defterkhane. I might have pronounced that wrong. The main effect which was to improve the management of land in Palestine so as to make it more profitable. One of the characteristics of this period is the relatively high taxes on the fellaheen had to pay the Ottoman Empire and the big landowners. Who were the big landowners? It doesn't say they were the Palestinians, even though they owned some of it. But remember, they sold 24% of it to Israel. Side by side with this system of land cultivation, there were others under which the land was managed by the community Masha and the Muslim religious institutions, Waqf. A third type of land ownership, and one that assumed considerable importance under the British mandate, was that of the common lands, which were considered to be public property and were administered by the mandatory power. Public property. Public means everybody can use it. Everybody can use that. Consideration of the systems of cultivation and land ownership in Palestine shows that most of the land was under the control of either the Ottoman government, Ottoman fiefs, or Turkish nationals, or of a minority of the Palestinian Arab population, most of whom lived outside Palestine. So if the minority owned the land and most of them lived outside of Palestine, when exactly did the Palestine have control over all this land like the people have been screaming? Had interests that did not conflict with those of the occupying power. So the minority Palestinian Arab population, most of whom lived outside of Palestine. The minority who owned the land didn't even live there. So how exactly was all this land Palestinian land? They were just working the land. They just worked there. That's like if I owned a Ford company and somebody else bought it and I fired all the workers and told them they had to leave and they claimed that it was their factory because y'all worked there for so long. Okay, we worked here for 20 years, but guess what? I own the building now. You got to leave. I can understand you being upset, but you didn't own the land. What's a mandatory power? A mandatory power is a type of authority that someone has to control or influence others. It is a legal right to act or not act, and the person with this power can change legal relationships. This power must be exercised as instructed without any discretion. This is the UN talking. This is on their website. And the UN is in favor of Palestine. UN doesn't really like Israel too much. Look at the history of what they voted for or against Israel. Excuse me, look that up yourself. I'm not going to go into that, but the UN really don't like Israel for whatever reason. So back to the UN. Excuse me. The big Arab landowners of Palestine. So if you continue on this site, I gave the link. With the encouragement of such Jewish institutions as the Palestine Jewish Colonization Association, the Palestine Land Development Company, and the Jewish National Fund, the purpose of these three institutions was to transfer the Jewish populations of Europe to Palestine and provide them with facilities, homes, jobs, and especially land in the new host country. It has been estimated that by about June 1947, the Jewish minority in Palestine had taken over 1,850,000 dunams out of the total of 13 million dunams, mainly as a result of transactions between the above mentioned Jewish institutions and the big Arab landowners of Palestine. How come it doesn't say that there was a war? It says transactions between these institutions and the big Arab landowners. Were these the Arab landowners that lived outside of the land or the absentee landlords? Or did I miss that they fought the big Arab landowners and took it by force? I could be wrong, but that's not what I'm reading. Maybe I missed something. I'm human. Maybe I made a mistake. But it says a transaction between the above mentioned institutions, doesn't say army, and the big Arab landowners of Palestine who were absentee landlords and such. Back to the UN. Land abandoned by the Palestinians. Of the 370 Jewish settlements established between 1948 and the beginning of 1953, 350 were established on land abandoned by the Palestinians. In 1954, more than 1/3 of Israel's Jewish population, plus 250,000 new Jewish immigrants, settled in whole cities that have been completely deserted by the Palestinians as a result of military operations of 1948. These cities were not taken, but deserted. According to the UN, not me. This is UN.org. Look that up. Here's the whole link. So if these cities were not taken, but deserted as a result of military operations. Now, why were the military operations? Israel's buying this land, right? So far, we see Israel purchasing land. And then there was a military operation. What happened? The Arab-Israeli War of 1948. It doesn't say the Palestinian-Israeli War. It says the Arab-Israeli War. Are Palestinians Arabs? Okay. But it's not talking about Palestine in the title, right? So here's the link, history.state.gov, history.state.gov, right? The Arab-Israeli War of 1948 broke out when 5 Arab nations, it doesn't say Palestinians, 5 Arab nations invaded territory in the former Palestinian Mandate, immediately following the announcement of the independence of the State of Israel, May 14th, 1948. On November 29th, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, also known as the Partition Resolution, that would divide Great Britain's former Palestinian Mandate into Jewish and Arab states in May 1948. Under the resolution, the area of religious significance surrounding Jerusalem will remain under international control, administered by the United Nations. The Palestinian Arabs, now let's call them Palestinian Arabs, refused to recognize this arrangement. So the United Nations got involved. They would control it. It doesn't say Israel would control it. They would control it. The Palestinian Arabs refused to recognize this arrangement, which they regarded as favorable to the Jews and unfair to the Arab population that would remain in Jewish territory under the partition. The United States sought a middle way by supporting the United Nations resolution, but also encouraging negotiation between Arabs and Jews in the Middle East. So they tried to make a peace agreement. The United Nations resolution sparked conflict between Jewish and Arab groups within Palestine. Fighting began with attacks by irregular bands of Palestinian Arabs attached to local units of the Arab Liberation Army, composed of volunteers from Palestine and neighboring Arab countries. These groups launched their attacks against Jewish cities, settlements, and armed forces. Sounds just like what happened on October 7th. Kind of sounds like what happened on October 7th. The United Nations stepped in, tried to make an agreement. The Palestinians refused it and started a war. Israel didn't start the war. They did. They were buying land. Oh, and what happened after they lost this war? Israel took the land that they abandoned, which means they gave up more land that wasn't even theirs, because remember, Israel was buying land and the Palestinians wasn't much owners of it. They owned some of it. They was also selling some of the land. Are they going to acknowledge that they sold any of the land to Israel? And what about those absentee people, those absentee landlords? They're going to call them to the carpet? Is anybody else responsible for any of this? Or is it always just Israel came in with tanks and guns and took the land? Is that going to be the narrative? Or are we going to acknowledge anything that I just read with the sources from the UN, who usually doesn't like Israel? What are we going to do? We go back to Wikipedia. It says the Gaza Strip and the West Bank have been occupied by Egypt and Jordan, respectively, since the 1948 Arab-Israeli War until the Six-Day War of 1967. So from 1948 to 1967, what's that, like 19 years? Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in 1967 and has since maintained control. But then, didn't Israel give Gaza back with the whole Gush Katif thing? And now they're bombing it today as a result of another attack, though. Or did I get that wrong too? So the Gaza Strip and the West Bank had been occupied by Egypt and Jordan. So was the Palestinians shooting rockets at Egypt and Jordan like they do Israel from 1948 to 1967? Was Egypt and Jordan fighting with the Hamas for those 19 years over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? Because it says occupied by Egypt and Jordan. I'm not a history on expert on the region. Maybe they were fighting. Were they calling to exterminate them from the river to the sea? The Jordanians and the Egyptians, was that Hamas's chant for them from 1948 to 1967? So when the Ottomans, the Turks, Egypt, and Jordan controlled, occupied, or owned the land like Gaza Strip and the West Bank, it wasn't a problem. But maybe it was. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm missing some politics in there. Maybe I'm missing some wars between Egypt and Jordan and Hamas. I'm not sure. I definitely, you can correct me on that one. I'm not an expert on that specific, occupation. But it doesn't seem like it was a problem. But when Israel bought the land and kicked out the people that did not own the land, it's a problem. Because nobody wants to talk about all these purchases in places that wasn't even populated, because the soil wasn't good for farming. Nobody want to talk about that land that nobody lived on. Right? So, to be fair, did I not show, according to the Torah, where Israel was wrong and how the stranger should be treated according to Torah law? In my first two videos, I showed where Israel was out of pocket and why the Most High said what he would do. He did what he said he was going to do to Israel when they're out of pocket. He says, I'm going to send terror on you. I'm going to bring calamity on you because you're not keeping Shabbat. You're not keeping the laws of the Torah. And if you were doing anything wrong to the strangers and the foreigners, you're going to have to deal with that. If Israel was doing anything against the Torah to any strangers in the land, that's a problem. So I'm holding Israel accountable by all means, if that was the case. But we also have to acknowledge the rest of the history too, if we're going to be fair. I showed the punishments they deserve for breaking the law, so please do not go in the comments crying about the Palestinians' land after I have read the history of land ownership and how it was acquired and from whom. Do not have this narrative that Israel just came in one day, that some Jews in the early 1900s came in with tanks and missiles and committed genocide and took the land. Because then you're not being honest. Because I just read from the UN documents. And the UN supports Palestine. The UN was involved. Let me go back and find it. Where is it at? The United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 181. They were involved in these agreements and these peace treaties. So unless they just made up all this stuff that I read on UN.org about these absentee landowners and transactions and purchases and how people wasn't even living in certain parts of Palestine, what are you going to tell me about this situation here? So I really didn't want to get into the politics of it, but I keep hearing this narrative that Israel just came in with guns and just laid everybody down and took this land. They didn't even have an army when they began purchasing this land. They didn't declare that the state of Israel to the 1947, 1948 era. And it says since 1948. In 1948, Gaza Strip and the West Bank had been occupied by Egypt and Jordan. since 1948 until the 6-Day War. So was Gaza and the West Bank that was occupied by Egypt and Jordan getting them same rockets and that same hate? And was the world calling them colonizers and genocide and all this stuff when they occupied the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? Egypt and Jordan, was they getting that same energy? Again, I acknowledge everything Israel's done wrong, according to the Torah. And we ain't even gotten to the Quran yet. That's coming. That's coming. But that being said, I'm going to stop right there and we'll see y'all next time. Shalom.